Alright, so now that we've been learning how to sculpt, we're going to go ahead and put some color into this guy. And you can see I'm just using the same thing we've been working on. And you can do the same where, again, you can open up a new instance of the demo head or something. It'll work all the same. So the first thing I'm going to explain to you is polypainting. Polypainting is ZBrush's own system of texturing, wherein in other programs, when you texture, it's going to be in a pixelated paradigm. It's going to be measured by the pixels and the colors that are being input on the geometry through an outside texture. Well, with ZBrush, in this program, you are putting the color inside the polygons. And to give you a better idea of how that works, you'll notice if we take him down to the lowest subdivision level, and we have like a blue color or something, let's go ahead and fill him with white really fast, just so we have something to work with. Now we'll switch to this like red color or something. Anyway, and make sure also you have Z add and Z sub off, otherwise it'll sculpt in and texture at the same time. But anyway, you can see here when I texture on them, we get in these really blurry edges, and they're just not good quality at all. And that's because each one of these color is being stored inside the polygon. And if there's lower polygons, then there's not a lot of space for the color information to store itself. So it's going to be really blurry and just not high quality at all, and it'll look like crap. Well, if we go ahead and go him back, we went back too far, let's redo that. And we take him back up to the higher resolution, and then we go to paint in on him. You can see how much more defined this stroke is. It's a lot more defined, it's a lot more detailed. Okay? So, why does this matter? Why does this matter to know this? Well, because when you take this out, say for instance into a program where you're going to bake down your diffuse texture to a map, to a UV map, then you're going to want to be able to know that when you bring it in, you're going to turn on vertex coloring. That's basically what it's known as outside of ZBrush, is vertex shading or coloring, or however you want to put it. It's it basically says that the color information is being stored in the geometry itself, so that when you bake it down to a UV map, you're extracting that color out into the UV map. In that instance, it'll be in the pixels, and when it's in the pixels, then you're just wrapping that UV map around the head, and the color should fall in place where you painted it in the first part of it. Okay. If you need a further explanation on this, there's a lot of resources on ZBrush Central and on Pixelogic's website for this sort of thing. Okay. So again, like I said, you're going to want to make sure that your model is divided to enough of a resolution to where you can get some decent quality while texturing in, because texturing is kind of the part that comes after all the sculpting and everything. So of course you're going to want some pretty good detail and some pretty good resolution in your texture. Okay. And up here, I'll reiterate one more time. I know I've already gone over this like twice, but I'll reiterate one more time. mRGB, RGB, and M. Material red, green, blue. Material red, green, blue. Most of the time, if you already have your materials filled in, which is going to be most of the time you're going to have it filled in already, just have RGB on. It's simple enough. And that way you won't disturb the material, or you won't accidentally paint on new material or anything like that. So RGB on is always a safe bet, just to keep it on. Once again, I emphasize make sure these are off, because you'll see if I have it on, and you'll notice you'll have this happen to you sometimes. You won't even notice it's on, and then you'll go to paint, but you'll see I'm sculpting at the same time, which is obviously not what we want. We're already done with our sculpting, so we don't want to mess with that anymore. So just make sure that's off. So this whole palette right here is irrelevant now. Okay. So here's your RGB intensity. This is going to work the same way as opacity, like opacity in Photoshop. It's going to determine how light and how transparent or translucent the texture, the color is. So if you wanted like some blush on him or something, or if you're trying to define the subdermis layer of the skin, then you can get some color in there and make it look pretty good, some subtle color. Or you can just go all out and we wanted like blood dripping from his eyes or something. You know, just crazy stuff. But if you've messed around in Photoshop, you should know exactly how that works. Okay. And the color swatch, the color wheel down here, you're going to want to pay a lot of attention to. Of course, you're going to be able to select what color you want, all the different shades of the colors you want. Okay. And then up here in the color menu, remember how we did before, we can fill the object, just like I just did before showing you all this. You can fill the object with that color, and that'll fill the currently selected subtool with all the color. Now going back up here to the color menu, if you see right under fill object, you see the system palette button. You click that and you open that up. That's going to open up your basic colors from the Windows system palette, or from the Mac system palette, either one you're using. This is going to basically be your limited color library, if you will. So a pretty good practice to get into if you're going to be dealing with a lot of colors while texturing is to if you're going to use a specific color or a specific shade of a color, then you can just click add custom colors and it'll add it right there, so that you can go back and select it. Like if we were messing around and we changed to a different color or something and we wanted to go back and get that color, just click color menu again, system palette, and it's right there for us to pick again, so we don't have to redefine it. Okay. And another neat trick too that a lot of people overlook, but it's super easy to do. If you happen to see a color you really want to use or something, but you're not quite sure how to define it, an easy way to do this is to just simply input the RGB values for it. You see the RGB values right here. Well, let's say I go into, I have one of my works from my website open in Photoshop, and say I like the color of the skin or something in this one, and I want to use it again. Okay, so I'll just click the eyedropper tool and kind of get the subtler version of it, and then you can see up here we have our RGB values for that color. So we can take those RGB values and plug them into the color swatch in ZBrush. So we got what, 233, 128, and 81. And we click down here, 233, 128, and 81. Now we have that color selected. So it's a good way to reference a color if you wanted to use something that you saw predefined already. And you didn't want to just mess around with the shades and try to figure out how to get to it. Just get it right away. We'll just fill it with that. Now we kind of have a orangish tan. And we can use a different shade of it now, of that same color, so it blends together a lot better. Let's drive down our intensity a little bit, so we can bring out the cheeks a little more. It's a little more highlighted. This guy's from the Jersey Shore. Spray on tan. So anyway. Okay. And like I showed you in the previous lesson about alphas, well, just like using them in sculpting, hey, guess what? You can use them with your texturing too. You can go over here to the alpha menu and just open that up, and we'll just select this one just for an example, and drag rectangle. And if we have our intensity set high enough to where we can see it, we'll just make it completely obvious and select the really off color from what we already have and drag it out there. You can see it drew the alpha out with just the texture on. So just like sculpting, you can use that to get some pretty cool detail. And if we took this same alpha, let's turn on color spray, and we made it really, really subtle. We can get some really kind of weird details in there if you were like an alien skin guy or something. You can get some really crazy results from this stuff, and you're using this all in conjunction with your sculpting and everything else, and it's just going to give you some really good results if you know what you're doing with it. Okay. And again, going back, while we're talking about things that you can use in conjunction with your texturing, hey, guess what? Masking works the same way. You can mask something off. Say maybe we want his jaw to be something completely different. So we mask that off. And we'll inverse that. And let's go ahead and hide that mask. And so now when we go down here, we'll give him like an iron jaw or something. Some kind of lock jaw. Turn our alpha off. Okay, it looks like crap with just the texture on it, because obviously we don't have any sculpting there to compensate for that edge, but this is just an example. We'll, how about we'll say face paint or something like that. Or actually, better yet, let's go ahead and undo that. Turn our mask back on. And let's actually just clear this mask. And mask him in a nice beard, or maybe just a rough shave, something. Inverse that. There we go. And we'll switch to like a brown color, or really dark brown or something. Take that intensity down. So now he's kind of got this rough shaven look to him. Some gangrene in there. Okay, obviously way too harsh color variations here, but for the sake of example. Okay, so you can do that with the masking, and you can get all kinds of crazy cool stuff with that also. And in addition to the masking, if say for instance you wanted up here on the forehead and you wanted to texture in something, you wanted to texture something inside like these little kind of nooks and crannies of the honeycomb grid or whatever we have on his face. But that's going to be pretty hard to do if you just do it by hand. You try to get in here, and you're gonna spill over the edges a little bit sometimes. Well, you can use something to alleviate that, at least by a little bit, and it's called cavity masking. Now, right here in the masking menu, right below all these options here, you'll see mask by cavity. Okay, go ahead and click that with just the default settings, and you see it really didn't do much. It's because we don't have the intensity set real high, so it's not going to really look for all the tiny features, but it's there. It's there. You can see it by turning the mask on and off. You can see how it kind of subtly shades it. But we really need to mask off these details, so let's turn the intensity way up, all the way to 100, and mask by cavity again. And now you see that we have a pretty harsh mask on him, actually. But it found all the details in the sculpt, and it's masking them out. And what that allows you to do is get in here and sculpt only the parts that are masked. And it makes it a lot easier to actually texture over the detail. Without interrupting the edges too much. Now, you'd have to mess around with this a little bit to get it to be a little more accurate. You could blur it. You could blur it through and then resharpen it again, like we did before. And that'll kind of give you a subtler edge and not mess too much with the rest of it. But it's really just a matter of playing around with it until you get something desirable. And keep in mind too that mask by cavity, that can be used in the same way with sculpting. If you wanted to sculpt some extra detail in there or something, you just mask by cavity, and it's gonna sculpt around that mask now of all that detail that's already in there. So it's a really cool tool to use. Okay. And you can also use all your different strokes, of course, with your texturing. Make sure we have that back on. You can use the different things like with the alphas to draw in new shapes with the texturing, of course. Give them some face paint or something like that. Or if you wanted to give him like a tattoo or something, and maybe you made an alpha in Photoshop of a tattoo, and you could select that and give yourself a subtle black or something, like faded ink, and draw that out to where it's almost like he has a tattoo. Not the best example, I know, but still. How about we just use this guy? Inverse that. Gives him a subtle tattoo of sorts. But it can be used for a lot of different things. So just let your mind run wild when using that. Let your creativity run wild. You can really go to some really cool places with it. You can also use your color spray, of course, to get really crazy varied results. Just texturing and all that stuff. So, a lot of combinations to play around with. Alright, so now I'm going to show you the Polypaint menu down here real fast. You'll come down here. Actually, let's just close the geometry menu. It's taking up too much space. And you'll see the Polypaint menu right under Morph Target. Open that up, and obviously we just have a couple options. So what I'm going to show you basically is the colorize right here. Simply put, this is how the model displays your polypainting, and if it's off, there will be no polypainting on your model at all. You click it on, it's on. Sometimes if you accidentally open up another tool or something, it might not come in by default with colorize on if it has texturing on it, if it has polypainting on it. So just make sure this is on right here, and it should display correctly. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to show you is UV mapping. Now, if you've been in the 3D for a while and you're just now learning ZBrush or whatever, there's not much else to explain about UV mapping that you might not already know. There are tons and tons of resources. It's certainly something you want to learn right out of the box if you're getting into 3D. It's an essential thing to know, especially in games. So, but as far as goes as UV mapping within ZBrush, you can import your model with the UVs intact if you so wish. If you start something within ZBrush and decide you want to UV it in here, you also have a couple options. And you'll see these under the UV map, which is right under the Polypaint that I just showed you. You open that up, and you see we have a couple different options here. Now, as far as goes map sizes, these days you're going to want to stick to a slightly higher, which is 2048 by 2048 is probably the most common. Even when I'm working on smaller textures for things, I still always start at a 2048, and I'll just resize it down later so it retains most of the detail. 4096 is a bit of overkill. It's still, even though we're getting into this point in the industry where things are getting bigger and bigger by the second, 4096 is still just a tad bit of overkill if you're not working on something like an environment. But for a character, 2048 by 2048 is a pretty common resolution to stick to. Either that or 1024. It's your choice. But anyway, so we're going to hit 2048, make sure our resolution is that. And down here we got a bunch of different buttons that kind of look like hieroglyphics if you don't really know what they mean. But they're really simple actually. Like in your 3D program, you'll see UV cylindrical, UV planar, UV spherical, and UV tile. You probably won't see UV tile in your program, but these three have the same common method of UVing the object as they do in your program of choice of your native 3D program. The cylindrical will obviously project a cylinder around it. The planar will project it from the front for a planar, and the spherical will project it from a sphere. For a human head though, not going to be the most accurate, obviously. You're not going to get much out of that. So with that, ZBrush has its own little set of options you can use. You got packed UV tiles, you have grouped UV tiles, and you have adaptive UV tiles. Now the one that was most commonly used before the newest version of ZBrush came out was adaptive UV tiles. And basically what this does is it takes a picture of each and every polygon that you have in your mesh, and it tiles it side by side by side like a puzzle, and it just lays it out there. This isn't so bad if you're just using it for preview purposes or something. Obviously something like that is not going to work if you're going to go back and try to edit your textures, because There's no real rhyme or reason to how the tiles are laid out. But if you want to take that back into Photoshop, you're just going to have yourselves a really big headache on your hands trying to figure out what color goes where. So obviously not a practical way of doing anything with texturing outside of ZBrush or previewing it. So in the newest iteration of ZBrush, they actually introduced UV Master. And this isn't really a new thing, but up until the newest version of ZBrush, you had to download it as a separate plugin. And with the newest version of ZBrush, it's included. So you go up here to the Z plugin menu, and I already had it open, you see. But if it's not open, just Z plugin and UV Master, second from the bottom. You open that up, and you have yourself some pretty options right here. But your two main ones are unwrap and unwrap all. Okay, unwrap is going to unwrap your currently selected subtool, and unwrap all will unwrap all the visible subtools. Okay, so right now we're just going to unwrap the one we have selected, and if you just click this, ZBrush pretty much does the work for you. Now, of course, it says you have to be at the lowest subdivision because it's going to be a lot harder for it to look for the seams that it wants to find with the higher resolution, because there's millions of polygons here, remember. So let's take it down to the lowest subdivision, which is something like 3,500 triangles. And we'll go back here, or over here actually, to Z plugin, and we'll hit that unwrap button again under the UV Master menu. You see it here working, and it works very quickly. You see what it says. It says one island generated in 2.6 seconds. And what that basically just tells you is that it generated a single UV island from this entire mesh. So now you have UVs to play with. And the reason this is important is obviously if you're polypainting on this guy and you go to export him, you want that information to remain intact in a UV map, so you can maybe go back and edit it in Photoshop later, and you can throw that on a model after you export the lower poly or something like that. So very useful. The UV Masters pretty much rendered this whole menu kind of useless in the later versions, but you still have some use with this if you so choose. So now that we have the UVs on it, obviously we're going to want to create a new texture from this with the UVs involved. And to do that, go down here to the texture map menu, which is just below the UV map menu, and open that up, and almost everything's grayed out except for what we have here and here. It's because we need to start ourselves a new texture. And to do that, just hit new texture, and everything turns black. What's going on? Well, because it has a texture on it right now, and it doesn't know what the texture is. You haven't told it what the texture was yet. So it's going to display what it has by default, which is black. So what we need to do, if you turn that texture on off, we get our polypainting back. So don't worry, it didn't get erased or anything. So let's turn this back on, and what we're going to do is go new from Polypaint. And what this is going to do is pull all our Polypaint coloring and put it into a texture map that we can use. You click that, give it a second to work, and it gave us a texture map. Now you see this island around it, this big blob we have. Well, if you understand UVs, then that's pretty much what it is. It's a UV island, and all our texturing and all our coloring is there. So now we have that, we can go ahead and just hit clone texture, and what that does is it sends this texture over here to the texture button, so we can select it again if we like, or up here in the texture menu. It throws it in the texture menu. So now we can export this, and we can open it up in Photoshop and do some more texturing on it, or we can take it to the lower poly menu, the lower poly model in the other program, and apply it to that, and it'll fit. So just also keep in mind that ZBrush flips the texture, and some other programs might interpret this differently. Like for instance in Maya, it's not going to read this properly. You're going to want to flip it so it's flipped vertically, and now when you take it into Maya, it should apply properly now. Okay. So that's pretty much that right there. That's how you get your texture out of ZBrush and into the other program that you use. And so that way you can have a real-time render of your model with that polypainting on it. So we're going to close out the texture map menu. And now I'm going to show you how to export a normal map. Now quickly, what is a normal map? A normal map is an illusion. A normal map is the way for your lower polygon model to project higher polygon, higher resolution detail. See if we took this down all the way, and you have your normal map applied to this, say for instance, it's going to look a little bit more like this. Maybe not exactly, because again, we're talking about deformation of millions of polys here. But it's going to look a lot closer to this, and it's going to give off the illusion that this detail is on this lower polygon mesh. But that's also something you want to look into if you don't know much about normal maps. Definitely research it. Again, in the modern times, it's something you really, really need to know. Okay, so down here in the normal map menu, which is just below the texture map menu, you can open that up, and you'll see here we have a couple of other options. Tangent coordinates, tangent space. Make sure you click that on. That's going to make sure that the map you create is a tangent space normal map, which is needed for games. It's going to give you the most accurate result, and it's the most commonly used format for normal maps. Don't worry about turning adaptive scan on. That's nothing really needed. Smooth UV and smooth low-res normals are on by default, so just leave those on. That's just going to smooth your UVs out and make sure that there's little to no artifacting. And switch red-green channels. You don't have to worry about turning that on unless you are planning on importing this into a game engine like UDK, Unreal Development Kit, because Unreal Development Kit and some other engines interpret the color channels a little bit differently than other programs. You can also do this manually in Photoshop. There's a lot of articles about how to deal with this out there, especially in the documentation with UDK. So if you plan on using it within UDK, research that stuff first, so that when you import your model, it doesn't come in looking all weird. And this is going to give you the same kind of option for that stuff. But again, you can do all this same stuff in Photoshop post-process if you need to. But definitely research that. So with all this selected, there's not much options to go with or anything. Just click Create Normal Map. And it says the map cannot be created while at the highest subdivision level, of course. So make sure it's at the lowest. And click Create Normal Map. And it's going to give it a second to calculate. Don't worry about what it did with the texturing here. That's not going to affect anything, because it's just applying that normal map to what's there. So, and now click clone normal map, so that we throw it over here into our palette. And now we have ourselves a normal map to apply to our lower poly model outside of ZBrush. And the same idea up here in the texture palette. You'll have your normal map loaded now, and if you have a program that interprets it differently, like the texture or something, then just click flip V, and that'll flip it again. That'll flip it upside down vertically, so that it will accurately display on your lower poly model. And then you can just click export and save that out, and then use that on your lower poly model. That's the simple way of doing this within ZBrush. There are a lot of ways you can deal with creating normal maps. There are a lot of outside programs that will assist you in doing that also. But for the most part, that's just a simple way of doing that I wanted to show you, so that you can get a grasp on how to do it within ZBrush. But outside of that, this tutorial was really just intended to get you started on texturing. It's really not a lot to it. It's a pretty straightforward thing to understand, but if you mess around with it enough, then you're going to get really good at it. And there are a lot of things that can assist you within ZBrush, like Spotlight and Projection Master and all that stuff that can really assist you with texturing and getting, you know, really crazy amounts of detailing in here and photo sourcing and all this other kind of stuff. But as this is a ZBrush beginners tutorial series, we're not going to get into that. And there are plenty of resources you can find for that on ZBrush Central, YouTube, and other places. It's not hard to find tutorials on how to use something like Spotlight or Projection Master. Just a simple search query away. So with that, we're going to end the texturing lesson, and we'll move on to the next lesson about rendering.